Welcome to this week's episode of Let's Chat with Derick. And this week we are discussing an incredible story. It is a story of how two young men turn $35,000 into $1 billion business. And I'm talking about the cannabis industry, and it's an industry that I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there. Well, this book, Billion Dollar Startup, gives us a behind-the-scenes look, and I am joined by one of its authors. Julie Beun joins me on the show today. Julie, how are you?
I'm very well, very well. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. And I've been looking forward to this because there's not many people that have had this behind-the-scenes look at an industry, as I said, that I think there's a lot of misunderstandings about, a lot of misconceptions, but an incredible story about all the excitement and the roller coaster ride that you all went through. So I'm going to start with this, Julie. First of all, how did you get involved in the cannabis industry?
It was kind of completely by accident. I was at Ladies Who Lunch, which of course I used to host for Catherine Landry. And I bumped into this young guy, Adam Mirren. And my accountant had said to me, there's a young guy who's going to be there. He's going to be handing out flowers. He's got a company called Hydropothecary, cannabis industry, but they need your help as a publicist. So I went up to him and I basically said, I know who you are and you need my help. And I just went for it. And he didn't know who I was from anybody on the street. So he basically I just peppered him with questions and with statements and all the rest of it. I'd done a bit of research, and he said, "Okay, let's meet," and the rest is history.
And that's such a Julie thing. I can see it right away. The journalist in you peppering with him with questions. Which brings me to another question: is I think Julie, doing this book again, everybody, $1 billion startup, get it, best-selling list, by the way. Uh, it seems like a natural fit for you to be involved in writing a book like this as a journalist, because I know you're curious by nature. Is that part of how this all came to be, the book itself?
Well, yeah, for sure. As a journalist, I write everything down. My desk is always completely coated with post-it notes and scribbled little notes to myself, and I've got multiple notebooks getting on the go at all times for different purposes. So sort of formalized it once I started working with Hydropothecary as the publicist, and then later as the editorial content director. I wrote everything down, and that means meetings and little comments and asides and all the rest of it. So by the time a couple of years in, Adam said, we should be writing this down. I was like, I got this. I got this. I've been doing this. So glad you asked. So,
Well, and
so
I imagine those
yeah.
early years, Julie, was like it was it. I just get this feeling. I don't know, like a movie scene comes to me all the time when I think of the early years in this industry and the position that you found yourself in. Was it like a newsroom? Like I just imagine all this chaos and people talking to each other, and like confusion, but confusion that is planned confusion. If you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. There were many times when everything would just have to change on a dime because the regulations changed, or suddenly funding would dry up, which was a huge issue. Trying to convince banks to fund an industry nobody had ever funded before, very conservative banks, despite the fact that the federal government, had stood up an entire industry. It had been black market and gray market. So who wanted to touch that? So we ran out of money frequently. It was always a scramble. For a long time, we worked out of a barn at the farm at Masson-Angers. It was cold. There was no heating. We had folding tables and lawn chairs to work with. It was it was chaotic, as you say, and it was very much like a newsroom because you didn't know what was going to come from the start of the day to the end of the day. But for me, that was intoxicating.
Yeah.
I love being a journalist, but the more I moved into magazines and that sort of thing, less chaos there was, because it's a
Right.
lot more controlled. You're working 6 months out and all the rest of it. This was adrenaline junkie central. Anybody who's ever been involved in a startup business knows that it's all hands on deck all the time. But you look around every now and again and you see there's a lot of adrenaline junkies in the room with you, and you're like, is this healthy?
Well, you mentioned Adam's name, and he had a partner, obviously, because it's these two young men that start. Tell me a little bit about these two, because they're fascinating characters.
They're so interesting. Adam Mirren and Sebastian St. Louis. So, Sebastian grew up in Blackburn Hamlet, and not a super well off family. And Adam grew up in Kamloops, very, very much not a well off family. But they were both born to hustle. These two guys, completely different in personality. Adam is the Liberal Party operative who, had a bunch of different. He co-founded iPolitics and years ago in Ottawa, and Sebastian, of course, worked at EDC, worked at BDC. Always the numbers guy. Basically quits high school in grade 12, and then because he thought it was BS. And then ended up going back to finish up his grade 13 and did a 4-year degree in 3 years, like just crazy. When they met, they
Wow.
did not like each other. The Sebastian felt that
Really?
Adam was, you know, oh yeah, he thought he was like a trumped up little greasy salesman who was talking all the time. And Adam just saw this guy who was just ferocious, and he has a Sebastian has got a very sharp intellect. But the one thing they had in common was their wives, who were sisters. So
Oh,
Nina and
really?
Aruna,
Okay.
yes, yeah, and they were both fierce women as well. They were brought up by a Southeast Asian Indian mother, a single mom, and brought up to be very independent. So these four people actually, when they came together, it was like fireworks.
You mentioned the financial hurdles, which I think, for most businesses and entrepreneurs out there listening, I mean, individuals, that's kind of an obvious hurdle. But what were some of the other hurdles? Because, things like, of course, stigma certainly comes to mind, which you've touched on a bit. But talk to me about some of the challenges, Julie.
Oh my goodness. One of the challenges was finding qualified people because let's face it, we were looking at people who had only worked in the black market industry. They were the only ones who knew about pot. So you're actually hiring
Right.
people who may or may not have had a criminal record, who may or may not have had, kind of a sketchy background, but they had this wealth of knowledge. So that was part of the negotiation of, tapping into that knowledge without uh, sort of staining, I guess, this shiny new industry. So it was finding people who were adjacent to the black market, who understood it, understood the cannabis cultivation and all the rest of it. Another thing was just getting things happening at the pace at which things were developing. So I always
Right.
use the example of stem cells. We developed the use of stem cells much faster than we were capable of dealing with it philosophically or morally, right? You think about
Yeah.
that 20
It's
years
a
ago.
great example.
And so the cannabis industry was the same. The things were happening at this incredible pace. We had this one guy who worked for us, and he worked in the semiconductor industry, which generally speaking in business circles is considered the fastest paced industry on the planet because they create new product that has to be stood up and marketed and shipped and around the world every 3 months. So that was
Right.
considered
Yeah.
the gold standard. And he said that the cannabis industry was 20 times faster than that. So,
Oh, my
now
goodness.
I work at CAA, and so the things that we're talking about now will be in market in 2 months or 3 months. In the cannabis industry, we would come up with a concept. It would be hard baked into reality within a week. or sometimes 2 weeks. And that meant marketing, it meant materials, it meant production. Everything had to happen really, really fast. So it was, what's the word? Head spinning.
That's a good way to describe it. You mentioned marketing and advertising. That's one thing I think would be, and not only that, but dealing with government. I mean, I can't even imagine the type of red tape and regulations that were thrust upon this industry. Can you give us an idea of what it was like working through all the regulations, stigma and financing aside? I am sure that was a big part of the challenges as well.
Oh my gosh, that is so true. One of the biggest issues was it was dealing with Health Canada, who they're trying to marshal this and sort of guide it through this regulatory framework, which, by the way, they were building the plane as they were flying it. So
Oh yeah.
we would be doing something, and then we would have spent money on getting some product to market, and then all of a sudden they'd be like, nay, nay, not allowed to do that. So for one example, we had a product that was uh, use personal use oil for
Okay.
women, and for a bunch of different reasons. Cannabis oil is great for endometriosis and period pain and all that kind of stuff, anecdotally. So
Right.
we created an entire campaign around this product. I wrote all of the instructions and all of this stuff, and then it was considered a lifestyle product, and we weren't allowed to go to market with it. So that that was by using what our understanding of the regulations, and then the regulations being interpreted a different way. Sometimes it would be one word that Health Canada would have an issue with, and we'd have to go back and rewrite our copy. That kind of stuff happened all the time, partly because the industry was being built as we were living it, which I'm not getting, don't get me wrong, it was very exciting. But it was
Oh
also
yeah.
extremely frustrating because you would put everything into getting something done only to have the plug pulled on it.
Well, and as an outsider, even from the industry itself, Julie, I mean, I think we even got that feeling, right? That it was, as you said, they were building it as they went along. They didn't really understand where they were going or how far they wanted to go. What's like one of the biggest lessons that all of you learned as you went through this?
I think, generally speaking, it's to surround yourself with people who are excellent at what they do and are smarter than yourself, and then listen to them. This happened over and over again where we would have a need. We would fill that need with somebody who was excellent at what they did. And then we all kind of dialed into what they were saying because we didn't have an opportunity to go to the School of Cannabis and learn
Right.
in a formal setting. Ask me anything about cannabinoids. I'm your girl. Like as a publicist and as content creator, I had to know all this stuff right on the tip of my tongue. I didn't learn that stuff through books and whatever. I spent hours and hours with the smarter people in the room, listening to them, asking them questions, going into the science of it. And that goes to Adam and Seb. They very cleverly built an executive team and a board that not only supported what they were doing and saw their vision, but also challenged them in ways that they needed to. So one of the things that Seb talks about all the time is fail fast and often, because if you're
Right.
failing, you're learning, and the trajectory is, success, failure, learn, failure, success, and you just keep moving through that way. And that really was the experience of the cannabis industry.
I look at this industry too a little bit like, the cryptocurrency industry where people just don't understand the valuation and how it happens. So maybe you can give us a little bit, I mean, summarize how two guys start with a $35,000 business and it turns into $1 billion valuation. I mean, it's probably no longer in that $1 billion valuation, but it did get to that point. How does that happen? Can you give people a bit of an understanding of how that works, Julie?
Yeah, it's funny you say cryptocurrency because Adam retired from the cannabis industry 2 years ago and is now the executive chairman of a cryptocurrency company. So
Really?
obviously he loves risk.
And
Yeah,
by the way,
so
that question comes out, and I had no idea that that's what he was doing now. So I just wanted to put
yeah,
that on the
that's what he's
table.
doing. Yeah, brain
That's
capital.
amazing.
I mean, yeah, and one day I'm going to get him to explain cryptocurrency to me.
I still don't understand it. I don't understand how
I
you
don't
go
get.
on mining for cryptocurrency. It's beyond my brain
Yeah,
capacity whatsoever. But yeah,
cannabis is
how, how,
cannabis is a
how
lot
does it
easier to
become that?
understand.
Yes, I think
So
so.
yeah, so basically, they started with a line of credit and a visa, and sometimes Seb would even have to pay payroll on his visa. That's just how it went. So what they did was they started off by, of course, getting the license. And one of the funny stories was, of course, they don't have a lot of money. It's their first 1.1 million raise was friends and family. So they would
Right.
ask anybody who had $10,000, um, who was a friend of theirs or family member, and people gave them enough to. I mean, that's considerable, right? These two guys who were
Yeah.
working out of a basement on Spruce Street in Centertown, getting 1.1 million just by touching their friends for it. So that was one thing, and that was a leap of faith for a lot of people because it's basically represented like it might have been, you know, 3 months of savings, 3 months of salary type
Yeah.
thing, right? Like not super wealthy people. So they a big part of it was that anxiety of knowing that if they screwed this up, they would not have a couch to sleep on if they lost everything because their friends would be like, no, no, you can
I
just stay
can't even
outside.
imagine. Yeah, I can't imagine being in that position. Like the anxiety would just take over for me. I mean, I think you have to be,
Yeah.
you've described them. You have to be that kind of personality, right?
Yeah, and so they knew they were taking a risk with other people's money, and but that gave them the impetus to really succeed because they knew that they had to do this. This was a ride or die moment for them. So there was that, and then they basically while Adam built out the business from a marketing point of view and product and all the rest of it. Seb was really out beating the bushes for financiers, and he found some investors who were willing to take the risk, who saw the vision. Now you're talking about a guy who, his initial decks when he went to Bay Street. Um, were very complicated and a little bit too hard for some of those guys on Bay Street to understand. I tell a story in the
Right.
book about how they turned him down, but they invested in a flip flop that had a bottle cap opener in the heel, and they were all high fiving each other about that.
Oh my God, the things that people come up with, and that we end up purchasing, by the way, as consumers,
Yes, I was
over
like,
the years.
I wonder if I could still get that on Amazon.
So yeah, let's continue on this. So how does it build into this eventually into this $1 billion valuation?
Yeah, so basically, there was a couple of things. Obviously they had to get buildings built, and so that was a big thing. It wasn't just that you were gonna like we had a greenhouse, we had a 7,000 square foot 3-season greenhouse, but that very quickly eclipsed because you're planning on what your harvest is going to be, and also we had to change our technology. So it was partly signaling to the markets that we were on top of the latest technology. So, the greenhouses we ended up with are so high tech. They lead the world in them. So it shortens the growing period of the plant. So what used to would take maybe 9 months now is like, we're looking at 3 months in and out before that we fully utilized all of the plant. So there was getting the best technology, getting people on board with that, hiring the smartest people, going to the capital markets and getting retail investors to really see what this was about. And one of the mistakes that they made early on was not putting money into investor relations. And what that means is going to Bay Street and investing in relationships there. Seb always said, "No, we are doing this ourselves. We don't need it." And it was a mistake in the sense that Seb still stands by that, because they were, accounting for every single penny. And that was another thing that reassured the investors that this was going to be a really well-run, financially responsible company. But the Bay Street, where the big investors were, they got introduced to Bay Street by one guy who was at a certain level. Let's say, you know, he wasn't interested in anything but a $20 million raise, because he takes his commission off of that $20 million. So don't come to me with $1 million raise. That's not going to pay for my kid's private school. Let's talk 20
Right.
million, right? So starting at that level and then slowly and incrementally building up to people who had serious money, $200 million and that sort of thing. But all the time, coming back with the kinds of projections that we're going to end up with a really healthy, um, you know, uh, profit. And
Right.
at the end of the day, these two guys, I can remember being in Toronto for when we launched on the TSX Venture Exchange, right? Which is like the BB Exchange. It's where all the startups start, right? Like that's where,
Right.
if you're under $20 million, that's where you start. And then a year later, they uplisted to the Toronto Stock Exchange. And at that point, Don Wright, who wrote the foreword for the book, said to them, I don't know if you guys realize this, but there are less than 100 Canadians who have got a company worth $1 billion in their lifetime. So they started it and it became a
Wow.
$1 billion valuation within, and you are two of those people, which they were like, is that even true? Is that a thing? It is a thing.
That's amazing. That's
Yeah.
unbelievable. And going back to some of the misconceptions, some of the things that you've talked about, in previous interviews, like with Mark Sutcliffe as well, was some of the dumb things that people would, statements that people would make to you guys, or questions that they would ask. I think this goes back into some of these misconceptions and misunderstandings of the industry. Like, I think people have this idea of, oh, you're in the industry, so during some of your sort of brainstorming sessions, you're all pulling out the bong and
Yeah.
smoking and having these kind of conversations where these amazing ideas come to you. I mean, it couldn't be any further from the truth. You can't run an industry in that
Mm-mm.
manner. It's like owning a brewery or a winery, and all of a sudden you're drinking all day. It does not work. It's not healthy, and it's not good for business.
No, and can you imagine what our investors would have to say if we were all stumbling around eating Doritos all day? Like that would not fly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there were a lot of stupid questions. I mean, at the science end of things, you know, um, people have a misconception about cannabinoids. So, there's THC and CBD. Those are the two main ones, although there are more than 200 cannabinoids. THC is the one that is psychoactive, intoxicating. CBD is
Right.
psychoactive in a different way. It's non-intoxicating. It works on different neurotransmitters, and its pathway through the body is much different. So it is actually great for anxiety, inflammation, and that sort of stuff. But it doesn't get you high. But people would be like, "Oh, sure." I'm like, "No, really. It's science. It's science." And then the other thing, I remember October 17th, 2018, that was legalization day. So 1017, as we call it in the industry,
Right.
is the Canadian version of 420. So 1017 rolls around. We've been working around the clock, just like absolute, we're at war sort of thing, right? Everybody's just double shifts everywhere trying to get this ready, because we had been a medical industry. And at that time, at midnight on that day, we became a recreational industry in addition to having medical products. So all the buildings, all of those fantastic warehouses, the greenhouses, the shipping, all of the oversights, the security, the everything, hiring 1,100 people, that all was that moment, right? And so
Yeah.
for us, it was just another day at the office, right? Where the only interesting thing for us was we were all given the corporate credit card and we each ordered $100 worth of pot products to be shipped to our houses, and then we would bring it in unopened, and we figured out how long it was taking to ship, and then we would look at all of these products from our competitors and and examine them and their packaging, and that was what marketing did. But we got journalists asking us if we were all going to like blaze up, and everybody was just going to, there's going to be a big cloud of blue smoke over Masson Angers, and everybody was going to be like
Yeah.
pulling out their couches and having a little nap in the afternoon. And honestly, it's like I remember talking to a journalist and looking at them and going, they don't make them the same way anymore, do they? I'm thinking on my in my
Yeah.
inside voice, because I'm like, we just spent like hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars rather, building these buildings. And it's like we have this idea, we have this store, we're working around the clock to open it. And on opening day, we're like, nah, let's just go
Ah,
party,
yeah,
dude.
forget it,
You
man.
know,
Let's blaze up and just let things roll, right? Things don't
I
happen
mean,
on
and
their own, people.
right, and who gets stoned or drunk at work anyway?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. I know. Oh, okay.
what?
Before we run out of time, I want to talk about the success of this book because you've had some great success. Tell me a little bit about the success so far, Julie.
Thanks so much for asking. Yeah, the book actually, the first thing was Chapters Indigo really got behind us. So they increased their order from 600 nationally to 2,000, and then they've blown past that. And that put it on the top 20 most anticipated books of 2021. And then what happened was we actually ended up on the bestsellers list for a couple of months. I'm pretty sure we're still in the top 100, but we ended up on the bestsellers list for business memoirs and for nonfiction. And honestly, that's really exciting to me. I mean, can you imagine? I I
Oh,
when I started this journey,
can't believe
I was like writing all this stuff down because I'm like, no one's going to believe this. They're going to
it.
think this is a fever dream, right? Like where she's just making
Yeah.
this shit up. And I'm so glad I wrote it down.
Yeah, well, it's a fantastic read, Julie. We've come to the end of our interview, but I want to let everyone know, of course, this is available everywhere books are sold. You can get it anywhere. Of course, it can be delivered directly to your home. It's called Billion Dollar Startup. Just an incredible story. Big thanks, Julie, for spending time with me today. Thanks so much for watching, and we will see you next week for another episode of Let's Chat with Derick.